The diner sign was lying face down on the sidewalk when I arrived. I noticed the little things first. The loose button on my coat sleeve. The coffee stain near the cuff of my dress. The way my left shoe rubbed against my heel because I had worn the wrong pair, the ones I usually saved for Sunday mornings at the diner. I had parked 2 blocks away because Madison had said there would be photographers near the front. She had not said I was unwelcome. Not directly. So I walked slowly toward her new restaurant with my purse on one shoulder, my keys in one hand, and a paper napkin folded around the piece of pie I had brought for Noah. Then I saw the sign. Parker's Diner. My husband had painted those letters every spring until his hands got too stiff to hold the brush. Now the sign was on the ground, pressed against the curb like old trash waiting to be hauled away. Before I could bend down, the glass door opened. Madison stepped out in a cream blazer, smiling over her shoulder at the guests inside. The smile disappeared when she faced me. "Mom," she said quietly, "please don't come in." I looked down at myself. My dress was clean enough. My hair was pinned back. The pie napkin was warm in my hand. "Why not?" I asked. Her eyes moved past me to the sign. Then back to my coat, my shoes, my purse, the little diner smell I probably carried no matter how hard I tried to wash it out. "This is an important night," she said. "I can't have people thinking we came from that." That? Not the diner. Not our family business. Not the place that paid for her braces, her school lunches, her first laptop, and every birthday cake she pretended was homemade when her friends came over. Just that. I folded the napkin tighter so she would not see my hand move. Behind her, through the glass, Noah stood near the hostess table. He saw me. His face changed first. Then his hand lifted. A small wave. The kind children give when they are not sure they are allowed to love someone in public. Madison turned her head. Noah's hand dropped. That was the moment I almost left. Not because my daughter had embarrassed me. I was used to swallowing that. I almost left because my grandson had learned to be careful with affection. And no child should have to do that. Madison stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Please, Mom. Just go home before the investors arrive." Investors. That word made me look past her again. On the welcome table, beside the flowers and champagne glasses, there was a glossy brochure. At the top were 2 words. Family legacy. I did not reach for it. I did not ask questions. I only stood there with Noah's pie in my hand and the diner sign at my feet, wondering how a woman could be ashamed of where she came from and still want to sell the story of it. Then Madison noticed the old wooden box tucked under my arm. I had almost forgotten I was carrying it. Almost. "What's in there?" she asked. "Old things," I said. For the first time that evening, her face did not look annoyed. It looked afraid. A corner of paper had slipped under the lid. I saw a faded stamp. One familiar name. Mr. Hollis. Madison stepped in front of the door. "Whatever you think you're doing," she whispered, "don't do it tonight." I looked at my daughter. Then at my grandson behind the glass. Then at the sign she had taken down before the first guest even sat at a table. I did not open the box. I did not raise my voice. I only made myself one promise. If Madison wanted to tell her family story tonight, I was going to stay long enough to hear which version she chose. I spent more than 30 years behind that little diner counter. Every morning began the same way. I unlocked the front door before sunrise, switched on the coffee pot, and watched the first light settle across the empty booths. By 6 o'clock, the regulars were already coming in. Some could pay. Some could not. I never asked too many questions. Bills still had to be paid. Madison still needed school clothes. After my husband was gone, the diner became the only thing standing between my family and losing everything. There were nights when my feet ached so badly I could barely walk to my car. I still smiled when Madison came through the door after school. "How was your day?" "Fine." She would drop her backpack behind the counter, steal a French fry, and finish her homework while I poured coffee for another customer. One afternoon, Madison found a stack of unpaid tabs near the register. She picked one up, read the name, and frowned. Mom, why do you keep feeding people who can't pay? I wiped my hands on my apron. Because hungry people still need breakfast. She looked toward the dining room, then lowered her voice. Do people at school know we do that? That was the first time I heard shame in her voice. Not anger. Not cruelty. Shame. To me, the diner was never just a business. People in town remembered those days differently than Madison did. Frank once laughed as he wrapped both hands around a warm mug. Evelyn, you fed me before I could afford breakfast. You paid me back. He smiled and shook his head. No, you never let me. Clara remembered even more. She quietly told a young waitress, this place carried half the town through hard winters. I pretended not to hear, but those words stayed with me. So I could not understand why my own daughter wanted to erase its name. Madison changed little by little. At first, she asked me not to wear my work apron when picking her up from school. Then she stopped inviting classmates inside the diner. It's just easier this way, she would say. Later, she stopped calling it our diner. She called it the place. Every time she chose different words, it felt as though another piece of home disappeared. Still, I kept the old brass key in my pocket. I locked the front door every night with the same careful turn my husband had taught me years before. I told myself she was young. I believed time would bring her back. Instead, time carried her farther away. One quiet afternoon, I wiped the dust from the old diner sign that had once hung proudly above our entrance. Madison watched me from the doorway. Mom, that name doesn't belong in the future. I ran my fingers across the faded paint before answering. It belonged to a lot of people. She looked away first. After she left, I stood alone in the silent dining room. The sunlight reached across the empty counter exactly as it always had. I opened the drawer beneath the register, looked at the worn family recipe book for a long moment, then placed it back inside and locked the drawer. Some things deserve to be protected, even from the people you loved most. At that moment, I still hoped Madison would remember what that old name had truly meant before it was too late. The first time I saw the brochure, I almost did not understand what I was looking at. It was lying on Madison's kitchen table, beside a glass of lemon water and a stack of linen napkin samples. The paper was thick and glossy, the kind that made everything look more expensive than it really was. Across the front, in gold letters, were the words Family Legacy. I stood there with my coat still buttoned, holding a grocery bag with eggs, butter, and the kind of tea Madison used to like when her throat hurt. That's beautiful, I said. Madison looked up from her phone just long enough to smile. Thank you. Elliot loves it. Elliot, our investor, she said. He's very serious about brand story. Brand story. I opened the brochure. The first paragraph spoke about generations of home cooking, small-town warmth, recipes passed down through love and sacrifice. It did not mention Parker's Diner. It did not mention my husband. It did not mention me. But every line knew us. There was a sentence about a young woman learning to cook before sunrise. Another about a family recipe that survived hard years. Another about feeding people when money was short. I read it twice, then once more slower. Madison watched me carefully. Mom, don't make that face. What face? The one where you think everything is about the diner. I closed the brochure gently. The room was quiet except for the little hum of her refrigerator. Isn't it? I asked. She sighed, not angry yet, just tired of me in the way adult children sometimes get tired of the people who raise them. It's inspired by it, she said. That's different. Then she reached across the table and gently pulled the brochure from my hands. And Mom, she added, when Elliot comes by, please don't bring up Dad or the old diner. It makes the story feel too sad. Too sad. That was what she called the years that kept us alive. A few days later, I met Elliot Graves for the first time. He was polished, polite, and the sort of man who shook hands with both hands. Madison stood beside him in the dining room of her unfinished restaurant, pointing toward walls that still smelled of fresh paint. "Evelyn Parker," he said, smiling as if my name had been waiting for him. "It's an honor." That stopped me. Madison's eyes moved toward him quickly. "You know my name?" I asked. "Of course," he said. Madison spoke about the original family story. Very moving. Madison stepped in before he could say more. "Mom just ran a small diner," she said lightly. "Nothing fancy. But it gave us a starting point." "Nothing fancy." I looked at the empty booths being assembled along the wall. They were darker wood than mine, smoother, more expensive. Still, for 1 second, I could see my old counter in them. Elliot turned to Madison. "The authenticity is exactly what makes this work." Madison smiled. I said nothing, but something cold settled under my ribs. That evening, I found the sample menu tucked between 2 catalogs on her table. I only meant to move it so I could set down the tea. Then I saw the first item. Maple buttermilk pie. My hand stopped. Not because people did not bake pies. They did. But the description used the same 3 words my husband had written in the margin of our old recipe book. Slow heat first. I could still see his handwriting. Blue ink. Slight slant. A small grease stain in the corner of the page. I turned the menu over. There were other things too. Chicken gravy with cracked pepper. Sunday apple skillet. The tomato soup Madison once said smelled like old people. Now it was listed as rustic heritage tomato bisque. I almost laughed. Then I realized I was not amused. I went back to the diner before sunset. The place was empty, and the chairs were still turned upside down on the tables. I unlocked the drawer beneath the register and pulled out the old recipe book. The cover was soft from years of hands. Some pages stuck together at the corners. I opened to the pie recipe and placed Madison's menu beside it. Slow heat first. Same words. Same order. Same little secret that made the filling hold. I sat down on the stool behind the counter and stared at both pages until the light outside faded. Then I remembered the other drawer. The one I had not opened in years. It stuck at first. I had to pull twice. Inside were old envelopes, tax receipts, and a folded copy of the first business license my husband and I ever filed. The paper had yellowed. The ink had softened with time. But the stamp was still clear. Local Notary. And under it, in careful handwriting, was a name I had not said out loud in a long time. Mr. Hollis. I did not understand everything in that moment. Not yet. But I understood enough to know Madison had not simply borrowed a memory. She had built a future on top of one. I laid the brochure, the menu, the recipe book, and the old license side by side on the counter. For a long while, I only listened to the refrigerator kick on and the wind touch the front windows. Then I closed the recipe book. I slipped the papers back into the wooden box. And for the first time since Madison started calling my diner embarrassing, I decided I needed to bring the box with me. Noah was still behind the glass when I looked back. He stood near the hostess table with both hands at his sides, trying to look like he belonged there. His shirt collar was too stiff. His hair had been combed carefully, the way Madison liked it for pictures. But his eyes were on me. I gave him the smallest smile I could manage. His face softened. Then his hand lifted. Just a little wave. Before I could lift mine back, Madison turned her head. "Noah," she said. That was all. His hand dropped like he had done something wrong. I kept my smile in place for him. I even nodded, as if it was all right. As if my heart had not folded in half right there on the sidewalk. Madison stepped closer to him inside the doorway and placed one hand on his shoulder. "Stay with me tonight," she said. "We need to look like a family." A family. I almost laughed, but nothing came out. Noah looked through the glass at me again. His mouth moved like he wanted to say something. Maybe sorry. Maybe grandma. Maybe nothing at all. Children learn very early when a room does not want the truth from them. I wanted to go in and tell him he had done nothing wrong. Instead, I stayed where I was. Because I knew if I made Madison choose between her image and her mother in that moment, she would use Noah as the wall between us. And I would not let that child become the place where our pain landed. So I only held the paper napkin with his pie and pretended my hand was steady. Later, I realized that Noah had known more than any of us thought. A week before the opening, he had come to the diner after school. Madison had dropped him off for less than an hour while she met with the florist. He sat at the counter with a grilled cheese, swinging his feet against the stool. "Grandma," he asked, "why do you keep that old box locked?" I looked at the shelf beneath the register. "What old box?" He pointed with his sandwich. "The wooden one. Mom said not to ask about it." My fingers stopped on the coffee pot. "She said that?" He nodded, then looked down quickly. "She said diner stuff is complicated." I wiped the counter twice before I answered. Some things are only complicated when people don't want to remember them clearly. He did not understand. Of course he didn't. He was 12. He still believed grown-ups said what they meant most of the time. But he remembered the box. And he remembered the name he had seen on one paper when I opened it once to put away an old envelope. "Who is Mr. Hollis?" he asked. I closed the drawer gently. "Someone from a long time ago." When Madison picked him up, she noticed the way he looked toward the shelf. In the parking lot, I heard her say, "Noah, don't bother Grandma with diner questions. She gets emotional about old things." Old things. That was what she called anything that held the truth. Standing alone outside the restaurant that night, I thought about that afternoon. I thought about Noah lowering his hand. I thought about how carefully he had learned to silence himself before his mother even finished a sentence. I could have opened the box right there. I could have said enough. But through the glass, Noah was watching me, and I knew the first thing he needed to see was not a fight. He needed to see that love could stay calm even when it was hurt. So I stood beside the fallen sign. I kept the folder closed. And I made myself wait until the truth could speak without making a child carry the sound of it. The investor packet was sitting open on one of Madison's new tables when I walked in. Elliot Graves stood beside it, reading slowly, one finger resting on the page as if he did not want to miss a single detail. Madison stood across from him, straight-backed, polished, smiling that careful restaurant owner smile she had practiced in the mirror. "This is strong," Elliot said. "The family history gives it warmth." Madison's smile widened. "That's exactly what I wanted," she said. Something elevated, but still personal. Then Elliot turned a page. I saw my name before Madison noticed I was close enough to read it. Evelyn Parker. Not as a person. Not as the woman who had worked 30 years behind the counter. As source material. Elliot tapped the line gently. "So your mother is involved in the legacy portion?" Madison's hand moved too quickly. "She supports it," she said. "In her own way." I looked at her. She did not look back. That was when I understood. Madison had not only borrowed the story. She had sold it. The next morning, I heard two young employees talking near the side entrance while I carried in a box of paper towels Madison had asked me to drop off. "The signature pie is supposed to be the big thing," one of them said. Madison said it's an old family recipe. The other laughed. "Fancy old family recipe. $22 a slice." I stopped behind the half-open door. A person can hear her life being repackaged in a stranger's voice and still be expected to stand quietly. I waited until they moved away before I looked at the printed tasting notes taped to the prep table. Maple. Buttermilk. Slow heat first. Those 3 words were not Madison's. They were my husband's. He had written them in blue ink beside the recipe after ruining the first 2 pies when we were newly married. That was not inspiration. That was taking. And for the first time, my silence began to feel less like patience and more like permission. Later that afternoon, Madison stood alone near the small stage, practicing her speech with a wireless microphone turned off in her hand. I stayed near the back, partly hidden by a stack of folded linens. "My family taught me that food carries memory," she said, looking toward the empty dining room. "Tonight, I bring that memory forward in my own name." My own name. She paused, started again, and smiled wider. This restaurant is not about where we were. It is about what we became. Then she lowered the microphone and turned to one of the staff. Make sure my mother isn't near the front when I speak. The staff member hesitated. She's coming tonight? Madison looked toward the doors. If she does, keep her comfortable, Madison said. Just not visible. The staff member nodded, but Madison was not finished. And if she asks to come near the stage, tell her Noah is overwhelmed and needs space. My breath caught. Noah had said nothing. Madison was willing to use her own son's feelings as a reason to move me out of sight. Not visible. I had heard many things from my daughter over the years. That one stayed. When I returned to the diner, Clara was waiting by the counter with 2 paper cups of coffee. She had known me long enough to read my face before I said a word. You found something, she said. I placed the wooden box on the counter. Clara's eyes moved to it, then back to me. Evelyn, she said softly, your husband did not leave you unprotected. I looked down at the lid. I don't want to fight her. I know, Clara said. But letting her erase him is not peace. I opened the box only enough to see the edge of the old transfer letter. My husband's handwriting was there. So was the notary mark. So was the name that had followed these papers for years. Mr. Hollis. Clara touched my wrist. You don't have to shame her, she said. But you do have to tell the truth. Before the opening, Madison found me near the side hallway. Guests were beginning to arrive. Music played softly. Someone was arranging champagne glasses near the entrance. She looked at the wooden box in my hands. Mom, she said, this is not the time. It seems to be exactly the time. Her lips tightened. Please don't make this awkward. Just go home before the speech. I could see Noah near the hostess table, watching us with wide, worried eyes. So I kept my voice low. I'm not here to embarrass you. Then leave. There it was. No softness. No pretending. Just the truth beneath all her polished words. I held the box against me. For years, I had stepped aside because I loved her. I had swallowed small insults because I thought peace was worth the cost. But now she was standing in a room built for my life, asking me to disappear before she claimed it. I looked past her at the stage, then back at my daughter. No, I said. Madison blinked once. I did not move toward the microphone. I did not open the box. I simply stayed where I was, close enough to hear the story she was so afraid I would recognize. I opened the folder in the back room of the diner after the last chair had been turned upside down. The room smelled like coffee grounds, lemon cleaner, and old paper. I sat at the little metal desk my husband had bought secondhand, the one with one drawer that never closed right, and placed the wooden box in front of me. For a long moment, I did not touch it. Then I lifted the lid. The first document was the old business license. I had seen it before, of course. Years earlier, my husband had told me to keep it safe, and I had nodded the way wives nod when their husbands are trying to be practical about frightening things. But that night, the paper looked different. My name was there. Evelyn Parker. Not beneath Madison's. Not beside anyone else's. Mine. The diner's legal name sat below it, faded but still clear. And at the bottom was a local notary stamp I had not thought about in years. The ink had softened with time, but the mark was still readable. Mr. Hollis. I pressed my fingers flat against the paper, not because I was angry, but because my hand had started to shake. Behind the license was the letter. I knew it before I opened it. My husband's handwriting had always leaned slightly to the right, like he was hurrying toward the next thing. The first line still felt like hearing his voice from another room. Evelyn, if anything ever happens to me, this place stays with you. I stopped there. For a few seconds, I only listened to the refrigerator hum through the wall. He had signed the transfer letter years before he died. He had named me clearly. He had protected the diner, the recipes, and the family name when I had been too busy surviving to understand why he was so insistent. If stories about quiet strength, family, and justice mean something to you, I'd be honored if you subscribed before we continue. The most important part of this story is still ahead. I folded the letter along the same creases and placed it back carefully. Then I thought of Noah. His small wave. His hand dropping when Madison said his name. The way he had asked me about the wooden box with grilled cheese crumbs on his fingers. He had not known what he was asking. He was only a child trying to understand why the adults around him kept treating the truth like something dangerous. I could have opened that folder the first time Madison called the diner embarrassing. I could have corrected her in front of Elliot. I could have stopped the brochure before it was printed. But every time I imagined speaking too soon, I saw Noah's face. I saw him standing between his mother and me, learning that love meant choosing sides. So I waited. Not because I was weak. Because there is a difference between silence and surrender. That night, I closed the folder and slid it back into the wooden box. I added the recipe book. Then the old business license. Then the transfer letter. I turned off the backroom light, locked the diner door, and held the brass key in my palm until its edge left a mark. Madison thought I had gone home. She thought I had finally understood my place. But I got into my car with the wooden box beside me, drove back toward the glow of her new restaurant, and decided that this time I would not leave before the story was told. I walked back through the glass doors with the wooden box held against my side. The restaurant had filled while I was gone. Soft music played from hidden speakers. Guests stood near the bar with champagne in their hands. Someone laughed too loudly near the flowers. Everything looked polished and warm, the kind of place Madison had always wanted people to believe she came from. Then she saw me. For 1 second, her face changed. Not much. Just enough. "Mom," she said, crossing the room quickly. "I thought you went home." "I know." Her eyes dropped to the box. Behind her, Elliot Graves turned from a small group of guests. His gaze moved from my face to the box, then to the folder tucked under my arm. "Mrs. Parker," he said, stepping closer. "I'm glad you're still here." Madison moved slightly between us. "She was just leaving," she said. "No," Elliot said. "Actually, I had a question." The room did not go quiet yet, but it felt as if one table at a time had stopped breathing. Elliot picked up the investor packet from the welcome table and opened it to the page where my name sat beneath the words family origin. "Madison said the restaurant is based on your family legacy," he said. "Did you agree to that?" Madison laughed softly. "She agrees with the spirit of it." "That isn't what I asked." I looked at Madison. She looked at me like a daughter asking her mother to disappear one more time. I kept my voice even. "I was not asked." Elliot's expression changed. Madison reached for the packet. "It's complicated," she said. "Mom gets emotional about the diner." "No," Elliot said. "It's only complicated if there are rights involved." That was when Madison lost a little more of her smile. She turned toward the stage, where the microphone waited in its stand. "We can discuss this after the speech." I looked at the brochure on the table. The menu beside it. The proposal in Elliot's hand. All of them dressed in nicer words, all of them pointing back to the same place Madison wanted hidden. Before she could step toward the microphone, I said, "Are you sure you want to tell this story first?" Her hand froze. "Mom." It was not a warning anymore. It was fear trying to sound like patience. A man near the bar turned his head. Noah stood by the hostess table, watching with both hands pressed together in front of him. Madison lowered her voice. "Please do not do this." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm listening." Elliot looked from her to me. "Is there someone who can verify the documents?" Madison opened her mouth. But another voice answered before she could. "I can." I turned slowly. Mr. Hollis stood near the side entrance in a dark coat, older than I remembered, but with the same careful way of holding himself. He had come because Clara called him. Or maybe because some truths have a way of arriving exactly when people hope they won't. Madison went still. Elliot glanced down at the old notary stamp visible on the folder. "You're Mr. Hollis?" "I am." Madison's fingers tightened around the microphone. "This is unnecessary." Mr. Hollis looked at her kindly, which somehow made it worse. "Then it should not take long." He turned to me. Evelyn, may I see the folder before anyone continues? I looked at Madison once, then at Noah. Then I placed the wooden box on the nearest table and rested my hand on the lid. For 30 years, I had kept that story safe. Now the room was waiting to hear whether Madison had any right to tell it. I lifted the first document from the folder and placed it on the table between Elliot, Mr. Hollis, and Madison. Nobody reached for it except Mr. Hollis. He adjusted his glasses, studied the paper for only a few seconds, then nodded as if he had just recognized an old friend. "This is the original business license," he said quietly. It was issued in Evelyn Parker's name. The room fell silent. Elliot leaned closer. Madison stayed perfectly still. "That can't be the whole story," she said. "Those papers are decades old." "They are," Mr. Hollis replied. "And they are still official." I said nothing. I didn't need to. For the first time that afternoon, nobody was asking me to defend myself. The documents spoke more clearly than I ever could. Madison forced a smile. "My mother helped with the diner, but everyone knows businesses change." Mr. Hollis calmly looked back at the license. "They do," he answered. "But ownership does not change because someone tells a different story." I watched Elliot's eyes move from the paper to the investor packet in his hands. He wasn't comparing memories anymore. He was comparing facts. Mr. Hollis reached into the folder again and carefully unfolded another document. "I remember this one very well," he said. "It was the transfer letter my husband had signed years before he died. The paper had faded, but his signature hadn't. Neither had the notary seal." "I witnessed this transfer personally," Mr. Hollis said. "Her husband transferred his ownership rights to Evelyn. Everything was completed legally." Madison took one step backward. "There must be another copy." "There isn't," Mr. Hollis answered. "The signatures?" "I verified them." "The seal?" "I placed it there myself." I lowered my eyes for a moment. My husband's handwriting looked exactly as I remembered it. He had never been a man of many words. Yet years after he was gone, those few lines were still protecting me. Elliot slowly closed the proposal folder. "So the legal ownership was never transferred to Madison?" "No," Mr. Hollis replied. The confidence that had carried Madison through the entire opening ceremony disappeared without another word. I opened the wooden box once more and removed the old recipe book. The worn cover rested beside the restaurant's glossy new menu. Elliot turned the pages one by one. Then he compared them. The descriptions matched. The ingredients matched. Even the handwritten serving notes matched the signature dishes being promoted only a few feet away. He looked at Madison. "Did you receive permission to use these recipes?" Madison didn't answer immediately. "They're family recipes." I finally spoke. "They are." Another long silence settled over the room. "They belong to our family," I continued softly. "Not to anyone willing to erase the people who created them." Mr. Hollis placed one hand gently on the recipe book. "The recipes were included with the documents attached to the transfer," he said. "They remain part of Evelyn's protected property unless she authorizes otherwise." No one argued. There was nothing left to argue about. Elliot slowly faced Madison. "Your proposal describes this restaurant as your family's legacy." "Because it is." "No," he said quietly. "It describes a legacy that belongs to someone standing right here." He turned toward Mr. Hollis. "To be completely clear, does Madison have the legal right to use the diner name, these recipes, or this family story without Evelyn's permission?" Mr. Hollis answered without hesitation. "No." Just one word. It echoed louder than the applause that had filled the room only minutes earlier. Madison looked toward the stage where the microphone was still waiting. Her carefully prepared speech was still lying on the podium. Every page depended on a story she no longer had the right to claim. Nobody asked her to begin speaking. Nobody applauded. For the first time all afternoon, she stood before a crowded room with nothing left to say. And I never had to raise my voice to be heard. After Mr. Hollis finished speaking, the room stayed quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. The kind where every person is afraid to move first. Madison stood near the microphone with her speech still waiting on the podium. The gold lights above her made everything look warm, but there was no warmth left in her face. Elliot Graves closed the proposal folder and held it at his side. Mr. Hollis gathered the documents carefully, as if they were not just papers, but pieces of a life that had finally been allowed into the room. I looked at Madison. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to fall asleep in the corner booth after school, her cheek pressed against her spelling book, one French fry still in her hand. Then I saw the woman standing in front of me, dressed in cream and pride, trying not to look small in front of the people she had wanted to impress. I could have said many things. I could have reminded her of every night I stayed late, every bill I paid, every birthday cake she let her friends believe came from somewhere nicer than my kitchen. But I did not. She had already heard enough from the papers. So I reached for the recipe book, closed it gently, and placed it back into the wooden box. Madison finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Mom, I waited. Nothing else came. No apology. No explanation. Just my name, held in her mouth like something she no longer knew how to use." I looked at her and said, "I'm not taking anything from you." Her eyes filled, but she blinked it back. "I only came to keep what was already mine. That was all. No speech. No punishment. No victory. Just the truth, standing between us." Then I noticed Noah. He was still near the hostess table, half hidden behind a flower arrangement, watching his mother and me as if one wrong breath might break the room open again. His small hands were pressed together in front of his shirt. Madison saw him too. For once, she did not call his name. Noah looked at her first. Then he looked at me. I did not move. I did not open my arms. I did not ask him to choose. Children should not have to cross a room like that. But he did. One step, then another. His dress shoes made soft sounds against the floor. Halfway across, he stopped and looked back at Madison. She said nothing. Her face tightened, but she let him go. When Noah reached me, he did not speak at first. He only leaned into my side, careful and uncertain, like he was still asking permission. I placed one hand on the back of his head. "It's all right," I whispered. That was when he wrapped both arms around me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a boy holding his grandmother in a room where everyone had finally stopped pretending. I did not cry. Not then. I only held him and rested my chin lightly against his hair. Across the room, Mr. Hollis gave me a small nod and stepped back. His part was finished. He had not saved me. He had only confirmed what had been true all along. A few days later, the old diner sign was back where it belonged. Frank helped lift it into place, complaining about his back the entire time. Clara stood below with a towel over one shoulder, telling him he was holding it crooked. "It's straight," Frank said. "It is not. It's straight enough for breakfast." That made me laugh. A real laugh. Small, but mine. By noon, 3 regulars had already come in just to see it. One touched the counter and said, "Feels right again." Another ordered coffee and pie without looking at the menu. Clara wiped the same clean table twice and pretended she was not emotional. The diner was not fancy. The bell above the door still stuck sometimes. The floor still creaked near booth 4. The coffee machine still made that tired little cough before it started working. But it was mine. And it was still open. Madison came by once, 2 weeks later. She did not stay long. She stood near the door, looking at the sign, then at the counter, then at the place where Noah had always liked to sit. "I didn't understand what it meant," she said. I looked up from wrapping silverware. "No," I said softly. "You didn't." She waited, maybe for anger, maybe for comfort. I gave her neither. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because some lessons cannot be softened by the person you hurt. The first Saturday he came back, I saved him a slice of pie wrapped in a paper napkin. The same way I had held one for him outside Madison's restaurant that night. He noticed. "You remembered," he said. "I always do." He smiled then, not the careful smile from behind the glass, but a real one. He sat at the counter with homework, grilled cheese, and a slice of pie he always claimed was too big before finishing every bite. And sometimes, when the afternoon light came through the front windows just right, I would look at the old sign above the door and remember the night it lay face down on the sidewalk. Back then, Madison wanted it gone before anyone could see where she came from. Now people walked under it every morning to come home to breakfast. That was when I understood something I had not understood before. I would look at the old sign and understand something I had not understood before. Quiet strength is not silence. It is knowing when to let silence end. If you have ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and keeping the peace, I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. I read every one.